Welcome back to Auntie Grace Tales, where life's deepest betrayals turn into the most powerful lessons. This story is about love that promised forever, responsibility that was abandoned, and a woman who was left pregnant while the man she trusted chose a richer, easier life. It begins with tears, silence, and shame, but it does not end there. Years later, fate brings them face to face again, not in love, not in anger, but in a room where power decides the future. Stay with this story till the end, because sometimes the people who walk away from you are unknowingly walking straight into the consequences of their own choices. After the snow fell gently over the campus of a small Midwestern American university, the cold was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the fear pressing inside her chest. She had come to the United States as an international student from Ghana with dreams that felt almost childish now. But somewhere between lecture halls, late-night study sessions, and love she trusted too deeply, her life had taken a turn she never imagined. Zainab met Ryan Carter during the kind of man who spoke about success as if it was guaranteed. He noticed her during a group project and admired how focused and intelligent she was. Their friendship slowly turned into something deeper. Ryan said he loved how humble and genuine she was. He said she made him feel grounded, and Zainab believed every word because love spoken softly feels safer than love shouted loudly. She cooked and ignored the quiet warnings from her instincts. When she found out she was pregnant, fear mixed with hope. She imagined they would face it together. She rehearsed the conversation 100 times, but when she finally told him, Ryan's face changed in a way she would never forget. The warmth vanished, replaced by calculation. He asked her to be quiet, to think logically, to understand that a baby would destroy his future. Days passed with silence, then excuses, then distance. And finally the truth arrived through social media. Ryan had announced his engagement to a wealthy American woman whose family owned multiple businesses. The caption spoke of destiny and growth. Zainab read it while sitting alone in her dorm room, her hands shaking, her world collapsing. She tried calling him, messaging him, begging him to talk, but he blocked her everywhere. The man who once promised forever disappeared the moment responsibility arrived. The university housing contract ended, her savings ran out, and without support Zainab was forced to return to Ghana quietly, carrying more than luggage, carrying shame, heartbreak, and a child growing inside her. The whispers followed her home, but Zainab's mother did not ask questions. She simply held her daughter and said that life does not end because someone walks away. The baby was born on a rainy night, a beautiful girl with bright eyes. Zainab named her Olivia, and in that moment something shifted inside her. Pain turned into resolve. She worked small jobs, studied at night, and raised her daughter with fierce love. Years passed, exhaustion became routine, but so did determination. Zainab enrolled in online business courses, learned finance, and slowly began building a small import business connecting African products to international markets. And her reputation spread quietly. She never spoke about Ryan, never chased explanations, never asked for sympathy. But fate has a strange way of circling back. Her company had grown enough to be considered a serious player. The same man who walked away from responsibility was about to stand in a room where she would decide who deserved opportunity. Zainab closed her laptop slowly, looked at her daughter playing nearby, and whispered a promise not of revenge, but of truth. She would return to America, not as the abandoned girl he left behind. Unaware to Ryan, the child he denied, the woman he erased, were about to stand between him and the future he desperately wanted. He thought leaving her was the end of the story. He didn't know it was the beginning of her power. After Zainab closed her laptop that evening, the decision she had avoided for years finally settled in her heart. Returning to the United States was no longer about reopening wounds, but about standing firmly in the life she had built with her own hands. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet preparation. Meetings with her international partners, arranging childcare support for Aliyah, and mentally preparing herself to face a country that once felt like a graveyard for her dreams. Aliyah was now 6 years old, sharp, curious, and unaware of the complicated history tied to the place her mother was about to revisit. Zainab told her they were going on a work trip, nothing more, because she refused to let her child carry a burden that was never hers to bear. The flight to America felt longer than the one she took years ago when she left in shame, but this time she did not clutch fear in her chest. She carried confidence, experience, and authority when she landed. The city lights looked the same, but she felt different, stronger, untouchable. The investment summit was hosted in a luxury hotel in New York, filled with polished executives, sharp suits, and quiet power plays disguised as smiles. Zainab walked in wearing a simple but elegant outfit, her posture calm, her presence commanding without effort. People noticed her immediately, not because she demanded attention, but because she carried it naturally. During the first networking session, she reviewed proposals, listened more than she spoke, and made notes with precision. Meanwhile, across the room, Ryan Carter stood surrounded by investors, laughing confidently. Presenting himself as a visionary leader, he spoke about innovation, growth, and responsibility. Words that tasted bitter to the universe. Zainab had not yet seen him, but fate was patient. During a closed-door pitch session, her company was assigned as one of the potential funding partners for Ryan's firm. When the moderator announced the next presenter, Ryan stepped forward confidently and began his pitch. And that was the moment their eyes met. Recognition did not hit him immediately, but something about her unsettled him, her gaze steady, unreadable. When the realization finally dawned, the color drained from his face. His voice faltered for a second before he recovered. Zainab did not react, did not flinch, did not look away. She simply listened like any other executive evaluating risk. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Ryan spoke about ethics, family values, and long-term vision, unaware of the irony dripping from every sentence. When the pitch ended, the panel asked questions, and when it was Zainab's turn, her voice was calm and professional. She asked about employee policies, accountability systems, and contingency plans for personal misconduct at executive levels. Questions that made Ryan uncomfortable but did not expose him yet. The session ended with polite applause. Afterward, Ryan approached her hesitantly, his confidence reduced to nervous curiosity. He called her name softly as if testing reality. Zainab acknowledged him with a formal nod, introducing herself as the CEO of her company. Nothing more. Ryan tried to speak about the past, about misunderstandings, about timing, but she cut him off gently and told him that personal conversations were inappropriate in a professional setting. Her words were not cruel, just final. That rejection shook him more than anger ever could. Over the next few days, Zainab reviewed his company's documents more closely, and patterns began to emerge: inflated projections, questionable labor practices overseas, and a suspicious dependency on family-backed bailouts. She requested deeper audits under the guise of due diligence, while Ryan grew increasingly anxious, unable to understand whether she was targeting him personally or simply doing her job too well. The truth was simpler. Zainab was protecting her integrity and the future she had built for her daughter. She remembered nights when she worked while Aaliyah slept beside her, remembered hunger, exhaustion, and humiliation, and compared it to the man standing before her now, asking for trust he never earned. Late one evening, Ryan finally confessed. Not everything, but enough. He admitted he knew she was pregnant when he left, admitted he chose stability and wealth over responsibility, and asked if she had ever forgiven him. Zainab listened silently and then told him forgiveness was personal, but trust was earned, and his company had not earned hers. She left him standing there with regret weighing heavier than rejection. What Ryan did not know was that the final decision had not yet been made, and the consequences of his choices were quietly aligning, not through revenge, but through accountability. As Zainab returned to her hotel room that night and called Aaliyah to say goodnight, she looked at the city skyline and understood that power was not about destroying someone. It was about standing tall in truth. And soon Ryan would learn that the future he abandoned was no longer something he could escape. He didn't know it was the beginning of her power. The tensions surrounding the investment summit thickened as the days passed, and while most executives focused on numbers and projections, again without warning, not with tears or accusations, but with authority and control. Meanwhile, Zainab remained focused, attending closed sessions, reviewing financial models, and requesting third-party audits with a level of detail that made some uncomfortable. Her reputation for thoroughness had already spread among the summit organizers. During one late-night review session, her legal and financial advisors confirmed what she had suspected. Ryan's company had been masking losses through inflated valuations, misclassifying overseas workers, and relying heavily on undisclosed family loans that violated transparency agreements. She knew exposing these issues would not only affect Ryan but hundreds of employees, investors, and families connected to the company. Yet silence would make her complicit in the same dishonesty that once abandoned her. The following morning, she formally raised concerns with the summit's compliance committee, submitting evidence and requesting a pause on all funding decisions related to Ryan's firm until a full investigation could be completed. The move sent quiet shockwaves through the conference. He tried calling Zainab repeatedly, but she did not respond. Not out of cruelty, but because the process had moved beyond personal communication. That afternoon, news outlets picked up the story of a rising tech firm facing scrutiny over irregular financial practices. Investors began pulling back. He asked if this was her revenge, if everything she was doing was because of the past. Zainab looked at him calmly and told him that her decisions were based on facts, not feelings. She reminded him that she did not create his problems, she merely refused to ignore them. Those words struck him harder than any accusation could, because they were undeniably true. As the investigation deepened, more issues surfaced, and regulators expanded their review beyond the summit. Emily, now Ryan's wife, arrived, unexpectedly, drawn by panic and media attention, not as a forgotten chapter but as the woman holding the line between collapse and accountability. She simply acknowledged the apology and explained that choices have consequences, whether we understand them or not. As the summit concluded, Ryan's company was officially removed from consideration, funding frozen, and a full regulatory investigation launched. Only a quiet certainty that she had done the right thing. The contrast was not painful anymore. It was empowering, because it proved that survival could grow into leadership, and, as she prepared to return home to her daughter, consequences would follow, and the final chapter would not be written in anger or vengeance, but in truth, dignity, and the life she chose to protect above all else. The months following the investment summit moved quickly, yet for Ryan Carter time seemed to slow into a painful crawl. Investigations expanded across borders, auditors combed through years of records, and the image he had carefully constructed began to dissolve under the weight of truth. Subpoenas arrived, partnerships were suspended, and former allies distanced themselves publicly. Emily watched the man she married struggle with fear and denial, realizing too late that the stability she chose was built on fragile ground, while Zainab returned home to Ghana and stepped back into her routine with a calm that surprised even her. She woke early, prepared her daughter for school, attended board meetings, and continued expanding her company with the same discipline she had built it on. She did not follow the news obsessively. She did not speak Ryan's name in her home, because the center of her world was no longer defined by what he did or didn't lose. It was defined by what she had already built. Yet destiny was not finished teaching its lesson. A year later, Zainab received an official invitation to testify as a key stakeholder and whistleblower in the final regulatory hearing in the United States. The evidence she had submitted had become foundational to the case, and her presence was requested to confirm procedural integrity and investor responsibility. She traveled again, this time with clarity and peace, stepping into the courtroom, not as someone seeking validation but as a professional fulfilling her duty. Ryan sat at the defense table, thinner, quieter, stripped of the arrogance that once shielded him. When Zainab took the stand, he avoided her eyes at first, then finally looked up, and in that moment he understood something he had avoided for years. The woman he abandoned had not returned to punish him. She had returned to protect the truth. Her testimony was calm, factual, and devastating in its honesty. She spoke of due diligence, ethical responsibility, and the consequences of deception in global markets, never mentioning pregnancy, abandonment, or personal betrayal. Yet every word carried the weight of those unspoken truths. The verdict came. Weeks later, Ryan's company was dissolved, assets seized, and legal penalties imposed that erased the future he once chased. Emily filed for separation quietly, no longer able to pretend that ambition without accountability could sustain a life. After the ruling, Ryan requested one final meeting with Zainab, and this time she agreed, not out of obligation, but closure. They met in a quiet cafe far from cameras and courtrooms. Ryan apologized without excuses, admitting that fear and greed had guided his choices, that leaving her pregnant had been the greatest failure of his life. Zainab listened without interruption, then told him that forgiveness was not something she owed him, but something she had already given herself long ago. She explained that her success was never about proving him wrong. It was about proving to her daughter that no one gets to decide your worth and walk away without consequences. Ryan asked about the child, and Zainab told him she had a beautiful daughter who lacked nothing, because she was raised with truth and love, not abandonment. She stood up, thanked him for acknowledging reality, and walked away knowing she would never see him again. Back home, Zainab founded a scholarship and mentorship program for young women, especially single mothers and international students, navigating systems that often ignored them. Her story spread quietly, not as gossip but as inspiration. And when Aliyah asked one day why her mother worked so hard, Zainab smiled and said, "It was because life sometimes tests you, not to break you, but to reveal who you are capable of becoming." And as Auntie Grace Delise shares this story today, remember this: some people leave when life gets hard, others stay, build, and rise so high that the past can no longer reach them. If this story touched your heart, like, share, and subscribe to Auntie Grace Delise, because every ending carries a lesson, and every lesson can change your life. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Auntie Grace Delise. This was not just a story about betrayal. It was a reminder that walking away from responsibility does not erase, it only delays the moment it returns. She was left with pain, a child, and silence, but she chose growth over bitterness and dignity over revenge. In the end, she didn't chase him. She built a life so strong that the truth caught up with him on its own. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Auntie Grace Delise, because every story here carries a lesson, and the next one might be the message someone needs to hear today.